You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Bobby will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. You can also join us in the chat room, which is now open, by going to ancientfaith.com/live. Another way to connect with us is to go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday and place your question in the thread for tonight's show. You can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. And remember that our live show is being simulcast weekly on the AFR Facebook and YouTube pages. So let's get started. This is the second program in a series on Orthodoxy and the arts. And tonight we're continuing our discussion of the state of Orthodox music in America. This program tonight will focus on Byzantine music, the ancient musical tradition forged in the very earliest days of the Church. What we know today as Byzantine music has its roots in ancient Greek, Syrian, and Jewish musical traditions. That means that the music that we hear in churches that use Byzantine music undoubtedly has musical elements that take us all the way back to Second Temple worship. The modal tonalities of Byzantine music can sometimes be demanding for some Western ears to capture at first, but these venerable canonical melodies make it possible in an audible sense to be at the very throne of God himself. Through these mystical melodies, we lay aside all earthly cares and truly focus on the worship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So tonight we welcome as our expert on Byzantine music, Richard Barrett. Richard is the protosaltus and choir director at Holy Domitian Greek Orthodox Church in Somerville, Massachusetts. He holds a performer's certificate in Byzantine music from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology and sings regularly with professional vocal ensembles such as Capella Romana and Psaltikon. He has served as an invited clinician, speaker, and singer at various Orthodox churches and sacred music conferences throughout the country. Since 2016, he has served as Chant liaison to the executive board of the Metropolis of Boston Federation of Greek Orthodox Church Musicians, and he's also the artistic director and co-founder of the St. John of Damascus Society and the executive director of Ages Initiatives. Richard, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Good evening, Father. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm so glad that you're with us because the arts are so important to us as Orthodox Christian. I think sometimes we take all of this for granted. As you know, as you may know, we had a previous show on the state of Orthodox music, kind of from a Slavic choral music tradition perspective, and we talked about some of the challenges. Yeah, and with both him and his wife, and we talked about some of the challenges that we have here in America. In promoting good music and promoting good singing. And of course, we want to continue this series. So we're so happy that you're here. And of course, we want to let our listeners know that you're welcome to call in to 1-855-AF-RADIO to give us your insight and questions. Do you sing at your church? Are you having difficulty training new chanters? So these are very important topics that we want to talk about tonight. So Richard, let's start by telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you became involved in Byzantine music.
Sure thing. So I was born about as far away from Boston as I could be, and still be in the continental United States. I was born in Anchorage, Alaska, and then grew up in Seattle. Long story. And starting in my teens, late high school and early college, I was pursuing a career as a professional classical singer. And my first professional gig, this was in September of 1997, was with a professional choir in Seattle called the Tudor Choir. And this first concert that I sang with the Tudor Choir, Tudor Choir specialized in English Renaissance polyphony and kind of late medieval polyphony. But they had as kind of the sister ensemble, sharing some membership and whatnot. This choir that was based in Portland that had just kind of gotten started called Capella Romana. And that very, very first concert was a program called Taverner, and it was a joint concert with Capella Romana, and the program was the music of the English Renaissance polyphonic composer John Taverner, and then also the 20th century English convert art music composer John Taverner. It was a half and half program. And it was such an amazing program to get, and that was the program that really introduced me to the sound world in a lot of ways, of not just Byzantine music, because Taverner wore his influences, may his memory be eternal, wore his influences on his sleeve, and in a number, from a number of other repertories too. Yes, there were pieces, things like Song for Athena, the piece that was famously sung at Princess Diana's funeral. That borrows from sort of a plagal fourth or tone 8, if we want to call it that, texture, and he uses eson all over the place. But then also there was another piece that we sang that was his setting of the Trisagion in Slavonic. And it's for choir and cello soloist of all things. And this was so far as I'm aware, this was my very, very first time ever singing the text of the Trisagion in any language, and it was Slavonic. So that was a fantastic experience, and that also through that experience I became friends with Mark Powell, currently the executive director of Capella Romana. I met Alexander Lingus, the musical director of Capella Romana, and I got to know all those guys for the first time through that experience. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna now. Were you Orthodox at this time? That's the part that I'm not sure about. Oh my goodness! So you were you were exposed to Orthodoxy through music.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So I grew up, this is also a long story. I grew up in kind of a weird household where I was baptized Lutheran. My mother comes from a very Scandinavian background. I had a very, very Danish grandmother, may her memory be eternal. And then my dad is a militant atheist. And then when we moved from Anchorage, Alaska to the Seattle area, we kind of, through a weird series of events, we wound up going to what was then sort of the biggest independent megachurch in the Seattle area, where I was baptized a second time.
Oh, wow.
And so, I grew up with kind of this tension of, sort of a vague memory of liturgy from, my Lutheran side as a little kid. Right. Then the evangelical stuff I was getting from my mom, and then this very, very strong skeptical hyper rational stuff I was getting from my dad. And it sort of left me in a place where I didn't know where to put myself religiously. I knew, the thing that I got from my mom that was amazing was a really, really strong sense of faith, and that that was important, but I didn't know how to put all those pieces together. And as a young adult into my mid-20s, and so when I first sang that concert in 1997, I was an Anglican. That was sort of where I wound up. As kind of a place where I was getting the liturgy side. I was I was getting the language of Christianity. Then I was also getting this message of, you don't have to check your brain at the door, this kind of thing. But it still felt like there was something very, very much missing.
And the music too. The Anglican tradition has such a tremendously rich tradition in music. Yeah,
absolutely. And I sang, and that was where I really became a church musician, in the sense of, really trying to bring the best of my artistry every Sunday to the service. And so, when my wife and I started inquiring into Orthodoxy, which was still another 6 years after that concert, it wasn't until 2003, which is a story unto itself. That was sort of the place that was kind of what I was bringing to the table. That whole set of experiences and tensions, and so on. But then there was without that first experience with the Tudor Choir in Cappella Romana in 1997, there was that helped give me categories. Let's say that helped give me some sort of umbrella for something. Even if it was mostly aesthetics, that still gave me a taste of what I needed to know. And through Mark Powell, I knew to be Greek Orthodox. I had no idea what that meant in 1997, beyond he wore his wedding ring on his right hand, and Easter services were sort of notoriously long, and so on, and usually on a different day than the rest of us. But I at least knew that about him. And so, when we started asking questions, when my wife and I started asking questions, we knew who to call. Without that experience, so much wouldn't have happened. That was an experience of God directly intervening in my life at a very young age, no question.
So when you actually entered into the church, and I want to now connect this to your knowledge and experience of Byzantine chant and Byzantine music, did you enter in through a church that was singing Byzantine chant?
Yeah, sort of. So in the fall of 2003, my wife and I relocated from Seattle to Bloomington, Indiana, because I wanted to finish a voice degree through the Indiana University School of Music, now the Jacobs School of Music. And we had just become inquirers, let's say, a few months before that. And through that, there's a wonderful bookshop in Seattle, the St. Nectarios Orthodox Bookstore, and I spent probably $600 there over 3 months before we moved to Indiana. And one of the things that I bought from that bookstore was a CD titled "Mystical Supper" by a group called Boston Byzantine Choir.
I remember that CD.
Oh yeah,
I remember.
Yeah, and I listened to that over and over and over and over and over again.
That was one of the first in English, I think, also.
Yep, it sure was. And I went back to my friend Mark Powell and I said, "Hey, I'm listening to this CD of Byzantine chant. What else should I listen to?" And he said, "Well, you know what you need to listen to? You need to find a CD called Divine Liturgy by Lykorgos Angelopoulos and the Greek Byzantine Choir." And so I tracked that down, and that was still another 50 steps up the ladder from the experience of the Boston Byzantine Choir's recording, and in a way, it kind of set up some false expectations, because when I got to the parish in Bloomington, Indiana, I had kind of a sound world built up in my head that had absolutely nothing to do with what this parish was doing.
Right. Yeah, I think
And
all of us go through that
sure.
when we listen to recordings online, or in my case, listening to music from Russia and hearing all of these professional choirs and professional singing, and then you get to your parish and it's 8 or 10 people that are really trying very hard, but
Yeah.
it's a little bit out of their grasp.
Yeah, or one or two people, and it's
Right.
you're like, oh, okay, this is a little different from what I was expecting. And the parishes that we had been visiting in Seattle had been, sort of very blessed with fairly robust choirs, and but but in any event, we converted. We were chrismated in February of 2005. And shortly after we were chrismated, I was asked to step in as the choir director. I had been chanting kind of informally there for a couple of years. The priest was very much of the attitude that the choir is the best catechism, as it were, and and also just from a very practical standpoint, this was a small parish that didn't have didn't have a lot of a small parish that didn't have a lot around it. I mean, the next nearest parish was at least an hour away, depending on the direction, maybe more like 3 or 4 hours away in some other directions. And so, for a lot of small parishes, there's very much a reality of, oh, you're here, suit up, in terms of service.
Right. The new guy.
Yeah, whether or not you're actually Orthodox in some cases, and and that is great. what that is. But when after I was chrismated, the priest said, "Will you take this on?" And I said, "Sure." And
wow.
So I wanted to bring the best of what I could to the music ministry there for any number of reasons. There was I had gone there to finish a degree with a kind of a focus in opera, but by the time we converted, that was really not on my radar anymore. I was sort of focused almost entirely on Orthodox music
really?
as a pursuit by that point. I mean, it got under my skin. There's no other way to put it.
That's amazing, and that's really a testimony to the power of music in our church, to the incredible role that it plays. And I sometimes when people that are not Orthodox they say, well, what's your church like? What is your service like? It's almost impossible to be able to explain it to them. And those words "come and see" just become so important, because you can't explain this. You can't just describe it. It kind of reminds me of the visit of the emissaries of Saint Vladimir to Constantinople, to Ighia Sophia, and they came back to Saint Vladimir and they said, we don't know how to describe it. We don't know whether we were in heaven or on earth. All we know is that God is there. And so, and that's, the music that you love, and in Byzantine chant is the music that they heard. So let's move to that. Sure. Now, you had talked in your story about, you were put into this position. It got under your skin, this Byzantine music. Again, I don't know if this is easy to describe, but what is compelling to you about Byzantine music? What is it about the particularly Byzantine music that really does get under your skin that you love so much?
Right. Well, one thing I can say from a very practical standpoint that is so compelling about it for me is what I had to put into it to learn it. Because for me, it was a very nonlinear process to be able to learn what I wanted to know. I wound up having to kind of finagle my way into a fellowship opportunity to spend a summer in Greece to do an immersion program in modern Greek, so that I would also have an opportunity to study with a Byzantine chant teacher over there for the summer, a wonderful gentleman named Ioannis Arvanitis. And then coming back to the States, I had to as musicians like to say, you get better by playing with people who are better than you are. I had to kind of make my own opportunities to play with people who were better than I was. Wonderful people like John Michael Boyer and Alexander Khalil and so on. So I have a lot of skin in the game from that standpoint, in terms of what I've had to put into it. And there's a big part of me that's driven to want to simplify that process for everybody else. I like to think that what I went through so that I could, streamline and make more accessible the process for other people.
So tell me a little bit about that, though. What is that? The challenge that you encountered? Was it a lack of Western notation? Was it the settings that maybe weren't in English at that point? I know that, in the area that I'm familiar with in Russian music, we also went through this kind of, there were 10 different settings of the same number, different translations, different stresses and so forth. So what are some of the difficulties that you encountered there? Help us understand that.
Sure. So, the materials that my parish had available to it in 2005 were these the much beloved Byzantine project of Basil Kazan, which
from the Antiochian Archdiocese.
From the Antiochian Archdiocese. This was an Antiochian parish, and so these are these handwritten scores. Very painstakingly handwritten, but handwritten nonetheless. The attempt to take the so-called 5-pounder, the Divine Prayers and Services of Father Seraphim Nasser, and basically set all that to music. And it's a monumental effort in so many ways. But the more time you spend with it, the more you realize just how much of a product of its time it is. In terms of, meaning absolutely zero disrespect, but, it becoming evident that this was the product of somebody who was not a native English speaker, for example.
Right.
And, and there are a number of things a number of melodic moves that feel very awkward, and like if you don't know the modal theory governing how he's written this particular piece out, how he's written it out seems very strange. And so it's a wonderful resource in terms of a snapshot of its time, but it raises almost as many questions as it sets out to answer. In terms of how to execute it properly.
Let me ask you a question, and I want to see if this is a parallel. So what I know that our progenitors would do, even, my father, the reality of it is they had the Russian original in their head. And what they did was superimpose those exact rhythms that were so well known. They would superimpose it onto the English text, and it would sometimes feel like they were shoehorning it in there. Is that the same thing that happened in Byzantine music?
Yeah, in essence, what Alex Lingus likes to call the whiteout method, right? You just take the existing composition, white out the source language, and then fit the target language in any way you have to, right? And so you wind up with very strange things like long melismas on unaccented syllables, and it just can feel very awkward.
Right.
Whereas when you start to go down the rabbit hole of Byzantine music theory and composition and so on, you begin to realize that in terms of how this music has been composed historically, there's a very, very tight relationship to the text. That there is a particular way that this repertory of musical phrases relates to relates to particular textual phrases, particular stress patterns, and so on. And these musical phrases are intended to bring out those stress patterns rather than obscure. Yeah, rather than obscure the stress patterns. And so, what the whiteout method has done historically is obscure the relationship of the music to the text in a lot of ways. And what has happened in the last 20 years or so is you have had a group of cantors and composers who are among other things native English speakers, but people who have grown up within the Byzantine chant tradition, who have said, the way we actually need to instantiate this in English is to recompose the melodies for the target language. And there has been some amazing work that has come out of that particular effort, and
right.
It's really revolutionized how we think of Byzantine music in English.
Right. So let me, Richard, let me stop you here, because
sure.
we don't want to lose our listeners. You and I are talking a little bit inside baseball, and we want to remember that we have a pretty broad listenership here. So what we're talking about to all of our listeners, and by the way, we want to remind everybody, 1-855-AF radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. If you have any questions about Byzantine music for Richard. Now, Richard, I have to tell you, because you and I didn't have an opportunity to speak right before the show, so I have a little bit of a disappointing news, but I think there's maybe an opportunity here for both of us. And that is the files that we were going to play tonight as examples of Byzantine music and also of the work that you're doing. I tremendously apologize. Our producers are having difficulties. They have an upgraded system, and they're not able to play those tonight. So I'm really very, very sorry. And I would direct everyone, maybe after the break, we'll make sure to post links to show people where they can listen to those things. But I do want to put you on the spot here for a second, if you don't mind, because I have some examples too. Can you give an example to our listeners of, even if it's a Lord Have Mercy or Kyrie eleison or something that is poorly set, maybe, the melody that everyone knows in the Great Litany, Kyrie eleison, and maybe, or whatever it is, so that people kind of get the sense of what you're talking about. In other words, what is poorly set Byzantine chant in English, and then chant that is more appropriately set?
You bet. That's actually, I have an example that I love to use for this. Let me pull something up here.
Sure. And while you're looking for that, again, just to make sure everybody understands that when you go to church, there are, and this is why, for instance, when we were talking in the last show about being able to support our musicians with our financial support, these are musicians that went to school for 4 years or 6 years or 8 years to study their craft. And so music does not just sort of automatically happen. These are musicians who are very learned, both in the musicality aspect of it, but also in the chant aspect of it. And so bringing both of those together is very important, so that when you come on Sunday and the music is uplifting, it's because a musician has actually set that appropriately, has composed that, has lovingly sort of worked with that, and is able to, bring that music to a place where it speaks to you and helps us in our worship. So, Richard, are you ready to give us a little example here?
Yeah, I think so. So the example that I like to use here is the resurrectional Theotokion in the third mode. So this would be at Vespers or Matins. Like at Vespers, you would sing it if it were a third mode Sunday. with nothing else, nothing from the Mineon interfering. That, you know, you would sing the resurrectional Apolitikion or Troparion twice, and then you would sing this after the both now, right? And so the Greek version, I'll just sing a little bit of the Greek version, goes like this. Setin mesitev sasantin sotiri anduyen simon anim numente otoke parthene. Just that much for now.
Yeah. Okay.
And the something that has always kind of stuck in my, you know, always jumped off the page at me, and again, meaning no disrespect to somebody who produced a monumental work.
Of course.
The Kazan's setting of that in English, as it appeared in the books we used at my parish in Bloomington.
Sure.
You know, just didn't capture it. Let's say so. Here's how it went. I'm doing this from memory because I don't think I have time to bring up to find the score on the Antiochian website. Thou who art the mediatrix for the salvation of our race, we praise you, O Virgin Theotokos. Something to that effect. And there are several problems there. One, one of that first word, thou who art the mediatrix for the salvation of our race, and then the rest of the phrase, we praise, O Virgin Theotokos. So that's a Nasser problem, not a Kazan problem. That should be thee who art the mediatrix for the salvation of our race.
Yeah,
but
I actually have the music. I have the music up here. Yeah.
Okay.
It says thee who art the mediatrix for the salvation of our race.
Yes. So Chris Holway of the Chris Holway of the Department of Sacred Music corrected that, but the handwritten original by Kazan it says thou, and you know, there's sort of an instinctive thing there where you know, we don't know that thee is the object of the verb, and we just see it at the beginning of the sentence, and so we think that should be thou. Right, and so there's sort of, and what's going on there is that Nasser has preserved the Greek word order se bin mesitev sasan, which is another conversation. But and then the way that the syllable trix of mediatrix just kind of lands on the back half of the last beat of the bar and then gets held over across the bar line. In the score that we were working with at the time, you know, I think Chris Holway may have fixed that too. But this was just a very, very problematic English composition, and you know, it was somebody trying to reproduce.
How did you solve it? Let's give the quick version, because we're going to go on a break, and then we have several questions and a caller online. Yep. So the solution is you don't try to preserve the melody as it was written for Greek. You recompose it for the source language, and I'm you who are the mediatrix for the salvation of our race. That's, you know, off the top of my head, because I don't have a score in front of me right this second. Sure. I put you on the spot there, but the point is you are matching the stresses of the melody to the stresses in the text. And that's the bottom line here, is what our ancestors sometimes, when they were starting with music, they didn't do. And so I apologize for putting you on the spot, where even though we're high tech here, but you know, sometimes we just don't have it all ready to go. So I apologize for that. Here's what we're going to do, Richard. We're going to go for a break. Ighia has a question, and we're going to come back to that. She does want to know, you know, what's the difference between the modes? Can you somehow answer that in a way which is understandable to our listeners, and then we have a caller online, and we're going to come right back after this message.
Great.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
All These Things, a new podcast from Ancient Faith Radio, in which Hannah Vasquez offers encouragement and inspiration, as well as practical tips, to mothers as they navigate their responsibilities with all these things: homemaking, childcare, food preparation, etc., while trying to stay focused on seeking the kingdom.
Being an Orthodox Christian in this world is hard, and mothering is hard. Combined, it's a lot to navigate and discern. I want to help be a guide for you in your journey toward the kingdom of God. That is the heart behind this podcast.
All These Things, seeking the kingdom of God as an Orthodox Christian mother. Available now on ancientfaith.com/podcasts.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
And Richard, we do have a question in the chat room from Ighia, and she wants to know about the modes, the difference between the different modes. So what I want you to do, let's obviously not go through all 8, and let's try to keep it sort of on a level where lay people can understand, but give us an example, even musically, and again, putting you on the spot here to do some singing, of different modes and what that sounds like and when they're used. Okay?
Sure. So to simplify a number of things, if you just take the white keys on a piano, C to C, so that sounds like C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? Now you can start, that's singing those pitches in that order. You can start at any white key and go up and go up all the white keys back to where you started, and you will have the same pitches, but in a different order and with a different mode. So, what I just sang was C to C. If I sang D to D without changing anything, still all white keys.
Right.
D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. And then from E to E, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. So each one of those, even though they're the exact same pitches, you have a different starting point, and by virtue of there being a different order of pitches, each iteration has its own character, right? And sort of it's different way. Each one has kind of a different set of ways that melodies like to behave.
Sure.
And so in terms of Byzantine music, it's the exact same idea, with a few more nuances, a few more ways of splitting things up, because Byzantine music, instead of 11 half steps, has 72 tuning units, 72 what we or so-called microtones, right? And so there are a number of there are different colors you can get in terms of your organization of pitches. But the basic point is you have the same scale, but you have a different starting point, and because the difference in starting point lends itself to kind of different ways that melodies like to behave.
So give us a practical example, like for instance, the Apolitikion for mode 1 and mode 3. How would those be different?
Okay, so we can think of the Apolitikion in mode 1. We can almost think of that as being D minor. I'll sing this in English. The stone had been secured with a seal by the Judeans, and a guard of soldiers was watching your immaculate body. You rose on the third day, O Lord, and Savior, granting life unto the world. For this reason were the powers of heaven crying out to you, O life-giver. Glory to your resurrection, O Christ. Glory to your kingdom. Glory to your dispensation, only one who loves mankind. So that's first.
Okay, that's a really good example because, yeah, you can hear that modal scale very clearly. Now, do a different mode for Gia and have her sort of understand how different that is.
So third mode, since you mentioned that one, if we were to write that one out in staff notation, it would look more like F major. Okay, so let the heavens sing for joy, and let everything on earth be glad. For with his arm the Lord has worked power. He trampled death underfoot by means of death, and he became the firstborn from the dead, from the maw of Hades. He delivered us, and he granted the world his great mercy. Right. So
see that's wonderful. Those are wonderful examples because they show us that there's the mode, there's the pattern of the melody, which, has very discernible pattern that is repeated over and over. And it really is just a very good example of how that system works. It's really kind of a brilliant system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, if you sort of give yourself permission to not have to copy the melody as it's sung in Greek or the melody as it's sung in Arabic or Romanian or what have you, but let a good English translation take its own route in this melodic texture, you get something that is still identifiably Byzantine music, but also still identifiably native English, so to speak. And that's really the transformation that's happened over the last 20 years.
Good. So Richard, we have a caller online. Caller, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but welcome to Ancient Faith Today. You're on with Richard Barrett.
Hi, Father and Richard. Richard, this is John Shelton calling from North Carolina. Hope you guys are doing well.
Hi, John.
Hey, so my question is, and you just kind of gave an intro to it. So you've talked about the transformation of chant over the last 20 years. My question is, where do you see Byzantine chant developing over the next 20 years?
Sure. That's a great question. So there are a number of there are a number of things we can talk about here. One thing that we can talk about is that along with this revolution in composition, we've also had a revolution in how this music can be taught and how the various skill sets related to Byzantine music can be taught. So, for example, someone who is a dear friend of mine and also a co-host of a podcast that I do on Ancient Faith Radio, A Sacrifice of Praise, which is a podcast devoted to tracing how the English language tradition of Byzantine music is developing. My co-host is her name is Amy Hogue. She's from your neck of the woods, Father. She's in Pittsburgh. And she's developed a system. She's developed a system called Byzantine Beginnings, which, and much like what I said earlier, she's very much trying to streamline and make more accessible the process of learning Byzantine notation and music theory, and finding a way for people who don't have access to a master cantor at their parishes, which is frankly most of us in this country, to still making it possible to learn what it is they need to learn. That's a huge thing in and of itself. And there are other teachers who are working on getting the education process instantiated, as it were, properly in our context. Teachers like Samuel Heron, John Michael Boyer, and Gabriel Cremines. That's one thing. That's one piece. Another piece is translation.
Richard, before you go on, let me before you go on to the translation, caller, if you don't mind me, let me interject a question here. How does that differ from how Byzantine chant would be taught in the Old World? How does this new approach that you're talking about?
Well, so historically, if you're talking about Greece or Turkey or Romania or someplace like that, the first, the prevailing model is basically master and apprentice, right? You grow up at your teacher's analogion, you hold ison for them, you read psalms. Eventually you get to sing "O Lord Have Mercy," you get to sing a kathisma hymn, this, that, or the other thing, but you sort of acquire a musical style and approach from your teacher in this way before you ever really start to learn to read music. Okay, and so there's this long process of acquiring things by ear that happens first. Well, that's not the reality for a lot of people in our parishes here in this country. I mean, we're still very much a mission field, and that's just that's not where a lot of us are at. There are places where that can happen, but there are a lot of places where it can't. So this is kind of trying to, and a lot of these approaches also use technology to try to bring mentors and master teachers to people where there isn't one locally. That's something that's just a few years old at this point, because that certainly wasn't even a thing 15 years ago.
Sure.
So in terms of but what teachers like Amy are doing are trying to take kind of music pedagogy in kind of its best form, best practice here in the States, even Western music pedagogy, and try to adapt some of the best ideas from there to Byzantine music here. And I think there's a lot of good that's happening there. So that's one thing that's happening in terms of influencing where Byzantine music is going in this country over the next 20 years. Translation is another huge thing. Byzantine music, for a lot of hymns, I said earlier that Byzantine music has a very tight relationship with the text. But there are also, that's for a lot of hymns, there is a whole system of metered hymns that are supposed to be sung to a particular melody. And so those texts need to follow a particular meter so that they can fit those melodies more or less naturally. Now that has some give and take even in Greek, but 40, 50 years ago, the prevailing wisdom amongst English liturgical translators is you can't do that in English. There's no way to do metrical translations in English in a way that's at all usable. Well, over the last in the last few years, you've had translators like Father Seraphidides and the translators at Holy Transfiguration Monastery who have demonstrated that's not true, who have demonstrated that you can, in fact, create a very, very usable body of metrical translations. So that's a change.
And Richard, just by metrical translations, are you also talking about rhyming, or are you just talking about the way in which the phrase is stressed and has a certain number of syllables or something.
Yeah, stress and syllable count and so on. It's like as my friend John Boyer likes to say, it's like if you have if you have a verse of a hymn that's written out to be sung to the melody of Amazing Grace, and everybody knows that melody, and if the text is written well to be sung to that melody, then everybody will know how to sing it, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Right.
So so metrical translation becoming kind of a normal thing that people do, that's a big thing. But also, translations being written intending to be sung, that's a mindset that I think has shifted a bit in recent years, and so that will shape how things go over the next 10 to 20 years.
And do you mean
also,
that the text would be poetic? Is that what you mean in terms of that it would flow in a certain way and
poetic, flowing? I think composers know a good text to set when they see one, right? That's I think for a lot of translation committees in various jurisdictions, musicians haven't really been part of the conversation in a number of cases,
right?
And
or
increasingly,
poets.
Or poets, and I think
or
increasingly, or writers, indeed, and increasingly, I think that's changing. But then another big thing that's changing is that just the perception of Byzantine music as something other than the kind of nasal sound that the old guy is making at the Analogion before Divine Liturgy. Right, that's kind of the popular perception of what Byzantine music is, and I think groups like Capella Romana in particular have really shifted our perception of what Byzantine music can be. Byzantine music, in its best practice, is choral music, and it's beautiful choral music. Capella Romana's most recent release, Lost Voices of Ighia Sophia, which is a choral performance of chants as we might have heard them sung in the Cathedral of Ighia Sophia.
Right.
I mean, that spent 15 weeks on the Billboard classical chart. I think 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks at number 1. So that in and of itself is kind of changing expectations and perceptions about what Byzantine music can be, and that I think will have a big impact on how the people composing Byzantine music in English now that'll have an impact on how they think about it and how they approach it.
That's great. Caller, any other questions or comments?
No, that was great. Thank you both. This has been an enlightening conversation.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for calling. Appreciate it very, very much. Richard, the hour is flying by, so I have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
You have done some groundbreaking work in the way that the music itself is married to the text and delivered to the psaltis or to the choir, to the chanter, and that is called the Aegis Initiatives. So tell us a little bit about what the Aegis Initiatives is and what the goal of it is.
Sure. Aegis Initiatives is a nonprofit that's the brainchild of Father Seraphidides, a monk. He was at the monastery of St. Paul in Mount Athos for 16 years, and he was the Typikaris. He was the person who compiled all the services for the monastery for several years, and he learned a lot about liturgics. He learned a lot about typikon and chanting, and he really wanted to put that to use for the benefit of music ministry in American parishes. And so he came back to the States, and he started, to make a very long story short, he started working on a project that he called E-Matins. And E-Matins was, he was manually editing a Word template every week, and basically what he was doing was he was providing a bilingual text, a bilingual script for Sunday Matins with everything you need in both Greek and English. And he did that for several years. And he sort of built that out over time, and there were other translations that he had done and other composition projects that he had worked on for Byzantine chant in English. And he sort of hit upon the idea that the Typikon in and of itself is kind of a computer program. It's a computer program that governs the church year. And if you could convert it into literal computer code, you could automatically generate these service text files that he was producing manually. And so he spent a lot of time with the help of a couple of other wonderful programmers who getting a library of texts together in both Greek and English, and also writing all the templates for all the services. And then what he came up with was a platform that could, with a click of a mouse button, generate months worth of service texts in just a couple of minutes.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
And so that exists now in a deliverable form via a platform called the Digital Chant Stand, which is available for an iOS app. You can use it on your iPad or your iPhone. There's an Android app, and there's also a web client at agesinitiatives.com.
Can anybody download that?
Anybody can download it. It's all for free.
Wow.
For the last year or so, we have been fortunate to be able to offer a full cycle of daily services for the entire year. Again, bilingual complete bilingual script for every service for every day of the year. And scores in both Byzantine and Western notation, in both Greek and English. And
so, would that be a good place if somebody wanted to learn more about Byzantine chant? Would that be maybe an idea of downloading that app and going through some things? I know
absolutely.
it's like drinking water from a fire hydrant, but still.
It's a starting
would be
point.
one way to do that, right?
It's a starting point, and there are a number of hymns that are linked to in the service texts that also have recordings attached to them, for people who to listen to them who don't necessarily read music, who can learn them that way.
That's great.
So the Digital Chant Stand is intended to make a beautiful liturgical life available to every parish.
Well, God bless you, because that, often can be overwhelming. Like you talked about parishes that maybe don't have other parishes around them. They only have a few books, and you've made this wealth of information available with Father Seraphim, and really just in the palm of your hand. It is revolutionary. Richard, we only have a minute left. So, and I, again, apologize that we were not able to play any of these files, but I'm going to be posting them on our Facebook page, so we'll be able to give people an opportunity to listen to a lot of these different groups that you've been talking about. But tell us a little bit about, as we end our conversation, the St. John of Damascus Society, and especially the big work that you just completed, the Heaven and Earth Project.
Sure. So the St. John of Damascus Society is we'll call that my passion project. The Ages Initiatives is my full-time day job. St. John of Damascus Society is something that I work on in my quote-unquote spare time. It focuses on Orthodox music as a form of outreach to a non-Orthodox general public, and looking at projects that can sort of support that effort. Heaven and Earth, also known as the Psalm 103 project, there are a lot of facets to it. The thing I'll talk about right now is that the music is it takes the text of the Vesperal Psalm in a beautiful translation by Archimandrite Ephraim Lash of blessed memory, and the text has been set collaboratively by 6 different composers, each working in a different idiom. So we have John Michael Boyer, who works in Byzantine chant, Taiki Zess, who works in Greek American polyphony, Alexander Khalil, who works in Palestinian Byzantine chant, let's say, Kurt Sander, who works in Russian choral music, Matthew Arndt, who works in Georgian polyphony, and then Richard Tensing of blessed memory, who worked in kind of what we might call an academic synthesis of all of that stuff. And what the 6 of them did is they created a 45-minute concert piece of the Vesperal Psalm, Psalm 103, that is an amazing musical journey. I mean, it's just where you start and where you wind up. It's beyond the wildest dreams of those of us who commissioned them to do this. And ultimately what the project is intended to be is a way of engaging the science and faith dialectic that's going on in our culture right now from an Orthodox point of view, using the text of the Psalm as a jumping off point to this idea of unity in diversity in the created order, and the music itself representing a kind of unity and diversity. So the Musica Rusica just published the score. It's beautiful. Capella Romana premiered the piece in October of 2018. Had COVID-19 not happened, we would have recorded the piece last week for the CD. So we're trying to regroup and figure out exactly how we can proceed where that's concerned. But a CD will be in the works eventually, as well as some tour performances and so on. And then also the intent is for it to be the basis for a film project.
That's wonderful. And what a tremendous opportunity to witness to the beauty of Orthodox music in all of its different forms at a very high artistic level. Richard, thank you for doing all of that and for bringing your talents. And again, my apologies to you for not being able to play some of this beautiful music, but I am going to post those links on our Facebook page. Thanks for being such a good sport, for singing for us and giving us examples and tutoring us in Byzantine music. I really appreciate it. We also want to encourage everybody to listen to your podcast, The Sacrifice of Praise, the living tradition of Byzantine music in America. You, along with Amy Hogue, to talk about and you discuss all of the facets of Byzantine music. Richard, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Father. This was a joy.
Appreciate it. God bless you. So again, before I share a few final thoughts, I want to express our thanks to Richard Barrett for sharing his observations and talents with us tonight. Thanks to Bobby for engineering the program. For everybody in the chat room, that was fun in the chat room. Gia, I hope you got a lot of good information out of that. I think she's going to be downloading the app here pretty soon and learn more Byzantine music to our callers and to everyone who listened online. Byzantine music is an Orthodox distinctive that gives us the very hymnography and melodies that connect us to the early church. Byzantine melodies embrace us with a sound that is truly set apart, holy. It's music that we hear nowhere else. It's good to know that serious musicians continue to study and perfect the craft and maintain an ancient tradition that has become for us a timeless treasure. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening live again for the next edition of Ancient Faith Today. We're going to talk about the Orthodox understanding and practice of evangelism with Father Photius Avant. Good night, everybody.